Welcome back, folks, to another episode of Nationalism, German Unification, the origins of the First World War. Here with Professor Way, or Johnny the Historian, trying to figure out which one I want to go by. Okay, well, welcome back. Now, I love the Italian and German unifications. It's part of I studied a lot of Central European history all over. But as you know, I specialize in Eastern European history, particularly honored in Russian history. Can't wait to start Russia, but we're not there yet. We have talked a little bit, but not 100% topic of Russian history. But now, we're at the final war of Bismarck. And the Franco-Prussian War. Alright? Now, after let's go a little rewind back. Germany at this point on the map is split in half. The northern section is pretty much the Protestant regime, and they are all united pretty much after the Austrian-Prussian War of 1866. Okay? Now, the southern states, Bavaria, the rest of them, and the southern half of Germany is not really part of the unified nation yet. Now, Bismarck is working on this, especially after 1866. Now, let's go back, okay? Organized the North German Confederation with a constitution. It actually happened within the Frankfurt Parliament. Developed the Frankfurt Parliament after 1848. And we talked a little bit about that back when we were talking about the year of Revolution, 1848. Now, this is what I love, okay? Now, Austria was totally removed from German affairs, all right? Especially after 1866. It helped a lot. Now, the predominant Catholic southern German states, well, they were out of the control of Prussia. Prussia had not reached the influence yet. They were still sovereign-speaking, German-speaking nations, in a sense, duchies and kingdoms. Well, this was a problem. Oh, Lord, it was a problem, all right? It was a problem. So, and they didn't like the idea, and they weren't even really interested in being entirely dominated by a Protestant majority of the North. Now, religion played a very important factor. Now, Bismarck is one of my favorite guys of all time. Okay? Now, something happens in 1870. And I love how Bismarck is a man of opportunity. This all starts the Franco-Prussian War. The final piece to get those southern German states into a whole unified German nation, which eventually Bismarck and Wilhelm I declare as the German Reich in pretty much Versailles when they're discussing the treaty after the war. So, now something starts to happen. Okay? Now, France gets word. Okay? Now, just one second. Okay, now the dynasty of Hohenzollern. Okay, this is one of the most powerful dynasties of Europe, okay? Like the Habsburgs, or the Bourbons, okay, or the Romanovs. So, now this dynasty, so Spain sends a message to Prussia. Now, the Hohenstein, basically, dynasty is in Prussia. They asked for a prince. Now, for France, France takes a little bit off guard here, boys. They're like, what? No. We don't want to be totally surrounded on both the east and the southern fronts by this dynasty. Now, Prussia actually rejects the offer. Rejects the Spanish throne for a Hohenstein prince to be king in Spain. Rejects it. Now, you think there wouldn't be a problem. But you got to think, well, there is going to be a problem for France to be okay with that. But wait a minute. France is like, hold up. Hold up, boys. I don't want this to happen ever again. This came close. Almost like a safety hazard. That was close call, but I don't want that to happen again. So France messages Prussia. Now this is great and all, and tensions increase between Prussia and France. And because, France didn't always feared, at this point in time, a dominated and military industrialized powerhouse of Prussia, they didn't want the dynasty at both sides of their nation, to the southern flank in Spain and to the eastern flank, which was pretty much on their borders as well. Right on their borders. They didn't want this. So to prevent this ever happening again, France asked Prussia, which pretty much was Wilhelm the First and Bismarck at the time, sent a telegram to the king and asked, "Can you promise me that this offer and this will never happen?" Well, so they demanded that King William the First, or Wilhelm, to do this, okay? To promise that the whole science will reject any future offers from Spain or anywhere else around France for royalty and monarchalship. Well, that was all great and hunky-dandy. Now, just like a man in opportunity, Bismarck sees this. So Wilhelm the First takes a telegram and he reports it to the incident that happened to Bismarck. Bismarck sees this. He's like, here's the man of opportunity. You never known wars have been started for less? Well, this is a prime example of the Franco-Prussian War. So, okay. So, he sees this as the opportunity to make trouble. Bismarck becomes Bismarck the shit disturber. And I love how he does this. So he takes the telegram, he rewords it. He changes a couple things. Okay? Sends it back to France, and he also asks, and he grabs the telegram and gets the media and the newspapers to publish it. Well, holy shit, now the public knows. Now this gives you a little, he just changed it slightly. Alright? Just slightly. So, when the French... had to stop the cat there for a sec. So, by the way, this is what I love about it. Okay? So, when the French read in the newspaper this Bismarck-modified telegram, it seems like they were embarrassing and humiliating and insulting their French ambassador, as well as France itself, in a sense. The French took this to heart. Well, the French do not like to be embarrassed. Now, in the Prussian newspapers, Prussians looked at it as a little bit differently. Alright? They looked at it as humiliation, rejection, and an insult. So, towards Prussia, worded it just enough to play both nations' public opinion. Bismarck's a genius this way. He was a man of opportunity, took this telegram and just reworded just enough. Now keep this in mind as a very, very immoral lesson in society today, how media can twist the truth just enough to sound like they're the bad guy, when realistically and truthfully, they're not. That's why all my life I was like, Russia cannot be that bad. Nope. And the West is so steep that we need an enemy, that Russia was that it. Cold War is over, but Russia was still always that number one to go to for let's have an enemy in a rivalry. I think Russian means, in the ancient language, rival. But that's not where Rus comes from. Okay? But, now anyway, back to the Franco-Prussian War, how it all starts. And I love how it all starts. Now, both people even in the public, even society, are so outraged by you disrespected our king, you disrespected our ambassador, you pretty much, this is where nationalism becomes holy hell, okay? Because any little insult from another country is like, fires your rate up. You're just raging on the roids here. Alright? This is nationalism. So you get that, like, oh yeah? You think you're better than us? Yeah, we do. So you're going to have this, even on a social aspect. At the time, this is awesome. Well, it's pretty amazing how this all unfolds, okay? I just love, I love this part in European history. The 1800s is awesome time. Pretty much from Napoleon to the end of the First World War is one of my favorite periods to study throughout the course of world history. As much in Russia, it's every period. Okay, it's just, in Europe, really, it's all awesome. But anyway. So, in July 1870, okay? Now, France loved the idea of rejecting this offer. They loved it, but they didn't want this to happen again, because that would be an alliance, right? That's why. It would be a political alliance. Now, Bismarck wanted to isolate France, but this is not a really good way to do it. Now, France, at this time, is known as the big dog, all right? They have the military, the economic power, the cultural finesse of the nation, okay? Well, not of the nation, but pretty much of the European theater. They are the star. All right? Now, don't get me wrong, there's not too many wars that they lost in Europe's front up to 1870. So they're standing pretty strong with each other as a French nation. They have the Crimean War, 1853 to 1856, massive victory over the Russian Empire. All right, so they had that. They had other colonial wars happening. They had also little war in the Italian Unification. Seized. So this all plays. France seems like it's a powerhouse. It has a strong military. Okay, we're going to focus on the military. Now, Prussia is the David. France is the Goliath. Alright? This is the scenario. This is the metaphor. Keep that in mind. Now, so in July 1870, France jumps the gun. They're the first ones to fire the shot. So, Prussia gets word of a declaration of war by France. France declared war first. Well, this folds right into the lap. You might as well give Bismarck a lap dance for free at this rate. Because it just folds right into him. He's like, oh, this is just great. They jumped the gun. They're pissed. And one thing about the French that you can make fun of is they don't like to be embarrassed or humiliated. Alone being insulted for any reason. So France really steps up to the plate. Now, you got to remember, the emperor is Napoleon III of France. Alright? He's conducting this whole thing. So, this fires off the Franco-Prussian War. Now, the French are going onto the battlefield strongly believing they believe that their army would sweep across Germany just like Napoleon's troops 70 years, 60, 70 years prior. Wow. Ballsy. That's pretty ballsy. They have the belief, all these soldiers, like, yeah, and France is like, yeah, our armies are going to sweep across Europe and across Germany like Napoleon did. Wow. The Maple Leaf Fairyland. This, it's kind of inspirational. we have the blood of our ancestors, that historical nationalism within them. But the reality was not so well. Okay? You just can't go on upon a belief that if Napoleon did it, we're still France, we're going to do it again. And despite our emperor is Napoleon III. So it's not going to bite. It's not going to bite the cake. Okay? It's just not going to bite the cake. All right? It's just not going to happen. All right? It's just not going to happen. So, now, France, well, well, like they did in the 1800s, it wasn't going to be that great. They were poorly equipped, poorly trained and supplied. All right? They were totally outnumbered by the Prussians. Their weapons were inferior. Despite they had one of the best artillery, just didn't know how to use it. Apparently. Not like Napoleon did. And they marched onto the battlefield. For 6 weeks, the war went on. France was losing. They couldn't go against the military might of the industrialized Prussia. They had better equipment, well-trained, disciplined soldiers. On top of that, even more technologically advanced. And then their soldiers. They were no match for the Prussians. No. Despite they thought they were Goliath, well, and they were so emboldened, so entrusted in their pride, that they were the ancestors of Napoleon's Imperial Grand Armée. They weren't no Grand Armée. Total opposite. But belief, all right, overconfidence, the French were. The Prussians knocked them back down to reality, back down to earth. On the battlefield in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Now, to top that all off, the Prussians besieged Paris. Now, until about January 1870. Because finally, Paris and the Parisians actually ran out of coal and ran out of food and supplies. They had to surrender the city. The Prussians marched into Paris. Well, that's going to happen again in the 1940s. Right? It's kind of a foreshadowing, right? In some sense. Well, the Germans just marched into Paris. This ended the war. That jewel of a city, that city of lights, the city of romance, was in the hands of the dungeon German porns. Okay? If you wanted to look at it that way. So, it was pretty interesting enough as it was. Paris surrendered in January 1871, officially ending the war. So, as it stood, so people needed someone to blame in France. And they really needed to blame them pretty well. Now, who are you going to blame if you were one of the French? You're going to blame the emperor. So what Emperor Napoleon III decides to do is he steps down and advocates from the throne before it gets heated. And he declares France a republic again. It goes back to the republic. Now, here's the funny thing I love about it. Now, they all have negotiations at Versailles. Alright, outside Paris. So, the demands that the Prussians met. We want to take the economic and natural resource-based regions of Alsace and Lorraine. That becomes part of the German Empire. Part of the German realm. Seized from France. At the same time, this is the funny part of it, is you're going to see pretty much mimicking down the road in the future, France had to pay reparations to Germany. What? Right? Now, nothing like a Frenchman scorn. Alright? Nothing like France scorn. Okay? This is how this actually all plays out on a lot of things. So, what's funny about it all, that I think is funny, so, the French, in the sense of David and Goliath, well, Goliath is knocked down. He's morally wounded. He's humiliated. The whole of Europe was shocked after the Franco-Prussian War. They realized the balance of power had shifted. France is no longer top dog, no longer feared, just like when Russia was knocked off the pedestal of their prestige after the Crimean War. Well, the Franco-Prussian War, was the Crimean War for France. Knocked them right off the pedestal, humiliated them, embarrassed them in front of the entire European theater. Alright? That Goliath was down, but not out. Now, if you're in that situation, you got to ask yourself, we all been in it. What are you going to do? What do you think? Revenge. Revangism starts to develop in France society, and filters its way into the Republican government and military, because it was more than just a couple wounds with salt in them. It was almost like getting amputated at the legs. Not at the kneecaps, at the hips for France. Knocked them right down. The rest of the European powers realized that Prussia's the top dog on the continent. This puts a little bit of fear into Britain. Things are going to start to change now. Prussia is the industrialized power at this point. Now, so, what tends to happen, right? What tends to happen? Now, during the war, this was unexpected. Now, the southern German states, during the war, aided Prussia, went to the aid of Prussia, not Catholic devoted France. This unified the entire nation. The three wars, Bismarck's wars. And for Bismarck, he appreciated this very well because it fell right into his overall ambitions for Germany. Now, one thing I love was at Versailles, they declared the German Reich. In a sense, it does become an empire. Alright? And it declares itself an empire, or Reich, in this sense. Which is pretty cool, and everything like that. Now, in January the 18th, 1871, King William I becomes King or Kaiser Wilhelm I, Emperor of the German Empire. The Germans are so unified by this point. They're so ambitious, and they feel so superior. Okay, they took out France. Well, way back in 1664, we took the Danes. That was nothing. Come on now. But we did take on the Austrians. We bumped it up a notch. Now we took the top dog, and we took them on. And we sliced them down at the waist. We're now number one on the continent. That becomes the German Reich, the German Empire. Now, and this is where, at the same year, Bismarck becomes the first chancellor of the German Empire. Now, Wilhelm II and Wilhelm II comes later on, but 1888. Okay, but at this point, Bismarck is the head and chancellor of an empire, and they work really good together, him and King Wilhelm I. Kaiser, or Tsar, are also known as Caesar, or Emperor, right? In lineage of the Roman Empire. So, this is huge. I love it. It's awesome how this plays out. All right? It's almost like on the school playground. All right? Because France has to defend its honor. And eventually what they're going to do is defend their honor. Because they're going to seek revenge. All right? They lose it. Now, remember the Franco-Prussian War really helped Italian unification. Because as you remember, well, Garibaldi's March on Rome, right? It was easy. Because all the French garrisons that were in Rome and the Papal States left to fight on the front lines of the Prussian War. The Franco-Prussian War. That helped Italy. What Germany did helped and really influenced, helped, and assisted without even knowing, in a sense. It wasn't on purpose. The Italian unification. This is what I find really interesting, how it's all connected, these three. France, Prussia, and Austria, and Italian unification. So, it's pretty interesting how that all plays out. And I love that part about history because it's all interconnected. It's a spider web. And it teaches us as historians and as a person, as your own self, is that your actions here, you don't even realize it could be positive or negative on the other side of someone else. You don't know. And this, we see it all in our lives if you really pay attention to your own personal journey through life. Right? This is what I love about it. Okay? Now, what eventually happens, at this point, Germany is unified. Great. Right? The aristocrats, the Prussians, are running the entire German Empire. Alright? The Junkards, the aristocratic Junkards, are running the nation. And Bismarck's plans start to change. We'll learn more about Bismarck later on in other sections and towards the origins of the First World War. How he plays a very important role. Okay? And then finally, the Franco-Prussian War ends. The treaties are signed. France is humiliated. They got to pay reparations. It hurts their economy. Bismarck really isolates France economically, politically, militarily at this point, because they just took them and shoved them in the hole, back in the corner. You're not getting off the top pedestal. You're coming down back to earth. And this time, Prussia's on top, putting their foot right on the head of France. Eat dirt, boys. War number 1. They get the gold medal. If it was an Olympics. But this is the lovely thing about it. I just love it. I love this part in history with the German wars and unification, because each one of them plays an effect on the rest of Europe, right? Plus, it changes the entire ball game. So, nationalism for the Germans, for the southern states and the northern states, Protestant, Catholic, actually put that aside and unite with other reasons of German nationalism. And down the road, the Protestants and the Catholics in Germany intertwined. And it seemed like it was nothing, okay? You're Catholic, you're Protestant, but guess what? We're German. Look what we have done. Alright? We are trying to build a a European power. The world power aspect happens with Wilhelm II in 1888 when he ascends to the throne. He's a little bit more ambitious on Germany's goals. We'll get into that in time. We'll definitely get into that in time. Now, within Germany itself, the ideals of liberalism and democracy are entirely crushed. But nationalism is on the rise. And Bismarck, as much as Wilhelm, and German society, people are starting to feel more and more united. And these wars solidify the supremacy, right? The superiority, all right? The superior nature of human nature here, right? Among the German people, believing that we took out France, we could take on anybody because of the status that France had. Prussia became the dominant power through nationalism and unified as a single nation to set the stage, the European theater, for an all-out brawl on the stage itself, which becomes the First World War. And I have to say, as a historian, there's so much more to this. If you learn on the battlefield of, and we could get into that, but I'm not going to actually get into that with the Franco-Prussian War, because it's usually a 2-hour lecture. I remember everything you need to know about it, an hour to 2. So I want to get a little bit more in depth, but we're only on like level 2. That's like level 4. So, but if you want to know more, go read it. There's books on it. There's everything. It's one of my favorite interesting wars that actually shaped the future of Europe. Was the Franco-Prussian War. So it revealed a lot. All right, and even the nationalist aspect that we're focusing on is how it all came to play. Now, because of all this, Prussia becomes a more powerful, aggressive new state that emerged in Central Europe. And it ultimately shakes the very balances and checks and balances of European power. And you gotta love it. And the people start to develop a strong, steroid-like nationalistic pride and behavior. And its army, and it becomes the best in Europe. It takes on France. Its navy becomes second to Britain, all because of this unified state. Its population is growing faster than any other. Its industrialization is exploding. It's accelerating beyond Britain and France and Russia and Italy and everywhere else combined. But the thing with that is, what's the downside of it? You have this kind of a state emerged within a few decades. All right? And it was 39 duchies, German sovereign, German-speaking entities, 39 of them, formed into one single German Reich within a matter of 20 years. So, if you think about it, less than that. And it just grabbed territories within Europe at the expense of France. What do you think happens? What do you think Britain and France, especially France, Italy and Russia and Austria and every other, even the Ottomans and Spain, fear starts to rise among those people. All right? It creates fear. Fear creates tensions. And tensions create rivalries. So, this is how it all sets the stage for alliances, which we will get to in the next series. We're going to talk about assassinations and alliances. And how, and pacts. We're going to be getting into that series. It's pretty interesting, the diplomacy and foreign affairs that creates the two major alliances. But people always forget there's the Axis alliance. Not just the Triple Alliance. Right? Or the Triple Entente. There's more to it. How it actually... Pretty much the next series is alliances, assassinations, and crises. Right? I think I'm going to go with that title. But anyway, we'll see what in the next series. But we still got a few more things of nationalism to wrap up. In my favorite part of the world, Eastern Europe, is the final piece of the world and the origins to the First World War. But this was Prussia. It became now Germany, the German Reich. Now, because of all this, because what Germany does and how it exploded within such a short time, it was just like people were sleeping and woke up in a coma and like, what the hell has just happened? Right? Did we just sleep through something? It was so quick in development compared to anything else that was going on in Europe in that century. It changes the game. And Germany is that new, fresh empire that was on top of almost everything. German efficiency. Alright? But until next time, this is Johnny the Historian. And please comment. Please, what you likes, dislikes, questions, whatever the may be case. Add things to be like, can you do something, an episode on whatever? I'm working, just to tell you now that in this episode, that I am working on making my videos not as plain as this, as a lecture hall in front of a professor in a classroom. Kind of feeling, but I'm trying to work on pictures, maps. Eventually, all these will be remade in time. But right now, I'm just getting them out there because I need to know what people think on the content or how it is and presented. Don't be shy if you do watch it or not. Just a like, subscribe, whatever you need to do. You have the free will, so do if you want. If not, don't bother me at all. But anyway, so with all this, that was the final war that actually unified Italy. Well, next time we're going to get into a few episodes pretty much on nationalism and how it weakens Eastern Europe. Well, in Eastern Europe, there's 3 empires that we're going to be talking about. You should know what they are. We're going to be talking about the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which forms in 1867. The sick man of Europe, the Ottoman Empire, and my favorite of all that we're going to go into is the Russian Empire and how nationalism affected those. So, and how it was affecting those. Some of it's going to be a little bit of recap, but then some of that recap, you're going to see it connecting to other things. Right? But until next time, remember, history is who you are today. It made you who you are today and where you are going. Until next time, this is Johnny the Historian. Yeah, there's a lot going on in the world, right?